Hey YouTube, it's Bree, and this is my much neglected channel, The Green-Eyed Girl Reads. It's been like 6 weeks since I made a video. I'm not entirely sure what happened to all the time. Some of it seems to be that I have a glitch on my iPhone where I get about 3/4 of the way through recording a video and then it dies. And I just almost got to the end of this video and it died. And I don't really know what's going on, but I'm going to give it another go. So to make up for my absence, I thought today I would do a review, which I know is meant to be the aim of my channel, and I think so far I have included one review and many other videos on other things. So today's book that I would like to talk about is Longbourn by Jo Baker. It was published in 2013 by Swan Books, and I first heard about it from Leanne at Literary Diversions. I think it was the very first video I watched of hers. She hauled it. And I was kind of intrigued and a little bit cautious for reasons that I'll explain a bit later on about the concept. I ended up picking it up on my birthday because I went into a bookstore and it was 20% off, and I felt like that was fate that I needed to buy books on my birthday. So the blurb on the front of this book, in case you haven't heard what it's about, is a reimagining of Pride and Prejudice from the point of view of the servants. Which is why I was both intrigued and also a bit cautious. I really liked the book Pride and Prejudice, and it was probably one of the first classics that I read in high school and actually felt like classics might be approachable and something that I might want to include into my reading kind of genre. I don't know whether I had read other classics before that and just not recognised that that's what they were, but yeah, definitely Pride and Prejudice had a very special place. It kind of helped that I read Pride and Prejudice the same year as the BBC drama. The 1996 BBC drama was first broadcast in Australia. So I think Colin Firth is always going to be my Mr. Darcy. So I've since studied, I studied it in high school, I studied it at uni, I've reread it multiple times, I've watched lots of different adaptions. I've seen it on the stage, all those kind of things, and it makes me feel a little bit like I own interpretations. Which means that when I come across an adaptation or a retelling or a furthering of the story which completely and utterly does not recognise the really minute aspects of the story or the characters, which I think are what makes the point of Pride and Prejudice, I have a tendency to get a little bit angry, a little bit book ranty, and I hold the grudge for years. So that's why I'm a little bit cautious now when I approach things, because I just there's not enough time in life for too much ranting, really. In case anyone's wondering what I rant about versus what I don't, massive fan of the English Bollywood translation in Pride and Prejudice the film, which came out a few years ago, like nearly 8 maybe, probably. By the same director who did Bend It Like Beckham. Not a big fan of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, because I really don't feel like they put the time into interpreting the text in what was a really interesting concept, but if you don't stick to the really important aspects of the stories and the characters and the time period, you're just gonna annoy me and make me angry and make me rant at you, even though I read that a really long time ago as well. But I'm really glad that I ended up picking this book up and going with I'm intrigued by that concept and not cautious, because this book was excellent. I really, really enjoyed it. To the point where I actually had a lunch break at work because I couldn't wait until the end of the day to read the last few chapters. And I don't know, I don't tend to allow myself much of a lunch break at work because I have lots to do, so that was a pretty significant step for me. Now this is the part of reviews that I find really difficult. Concrete reasons as to why I really, really loved this book. One is the writing style. It's very smooth. I had just come off reading Burial Rites by Hannah Kent, so it's kind of in that kind of full-bodied, full-worded terms, but not so complicated sentences that you have to reread and you get lost and you can't just kind of flow through the story. What else? On that same vein, I think the use of 3 people's point of views to tell the story, which is Mrs. Hill, Sarah the housemaid and James the manservant, including the kind of pacing and when not to include backstory, was really well done, because it just kept the suspense and it gave you hints of what was happening, and then it was kind of confirmed as you got to it. 2, the characters and their interpretation and like the development of Sarah and Mrs. Hill was really, really well handled, especially Sarah, who was like this great mix of naivety and self-awareness, and whose sort of story arc carried the whole novel, really. And that was the place where being set against Pride and Prejudice was really useful for this book, because you obviously, when you read Pride and Prejudice, you're seeing the restrictiveness of the life of the Bennets, of the women of that time period, and money and all those kind of concerns. And so then we step into the lives of the servants, and it's yet again another really big step of restriction and less safety net again than what the Bennet women have. So that setting really kind of shows up the characters of Mrs. Hill and Sarah and how they deal with their own lives and their restrictions while still being like thinking, loving human beings. Third point, which I wrote down somewhere down here, is the interpretation of the characters. So there's no point of view from any of the characters from Pride and Prejudice, and you only really come in on characters that are relevant to the servants' lives, so mostly the Bennets, because these are the servants that live in Longbourn. So I think that the relationship between, or the interpretation by Sarah of especially Lizzie and Jane, and the mixture of friendship and then jealousy, and Sarah's difficulty with feeling like she's invisible sometimes as a servant was really well done, and the complex relationship between Mrs. Hill, Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet was really, really well done as well. And the fourth point that I really, really liked about this was the fact that it drew in a lot of other, like it made it a much broader world, because it brought in social and historical and international issues that I don't kind of get as much of an impression from reading Pride and Prejudice, but are probably more relevant to the way, given that this book is written now for us as an audience, the broader kind of international aspects are things that we are more used to having acknowledged, whereas I feel like when Pride and Prejudice was written, because it was a comedy of manners, or, you know, a manners kind of narrative, it was more restricted into English aristocracy. And so there's 3 main kind of elements of this that I noticed. One is through the characters of Sarah and Polly, who are both maid servants at Longbourn. Both of them were taken from the poorhouse, basically, and raised as servants, and this really informs their character, and it also gives you a much better view of like how the lower class people really kind of lived. The second is Ptolemy Bingley, who is a servant from the Bingley household, who is obviously actually an illegitimate child of the old Mr. Bingley and a slave from the sugar plantations, which is where they make their money. And a lot of this is interpreted through the way people respond to him and his own tale that he tells you. And thirdly is the Napoleonic War in Spain, as told through flashbacks from James's point of view. The only kind of negative that I had was I probably would have liked a bit more depth in the ending, but I don't know if that's because I just wasn't really ready for the book to be over, and in the long run, sometimes like a clean, brief ending of a story, of a novel is stronger than if you epilogue or give too much detail. And there was a wrap up for some of the characters, but I don't know, I would have liked another point of view part maybe from Sarah than what we just got at the end. But it was really such a small distraction from the whole novel, which I really enjoyed. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, and I have been recommending it to all my friends who I know like Pride and Prejudice. I don't know how you'd go if you didn't have at least read Pride and Prejudice once, because I don't know, there's just some parts of it where it was greatly informed by that for me. And sorry if I flick right down to the bottom, and I don't. So, I also had that whole thing where I was going to do 5 tags to describe books that I review. So for this I said Pride and Prejudice, obviously, classics reimagined, historical fiction, class and poverty, and apparently I didn't come up with the fifth one. Maybe women's narrative, that kind of thing. Yeah, so overall I really enjoyed Longbourn by Jo Baker, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in maybe a furthering of the world of Jane Austen, or if you just really like historical fiction and, you know, Jane Austen is a classical era that you like. So, has anyone else read Longbourn? I'd really be interested to hear some more. I keep meaning to go onto Goodreads to have a look at what everybody else's reviews have said. Yeah, basically, I really enjoyed it. I'd love to hear what people think, or if anything that you've read recently that you really enjoy. Until I get around to making another video, bye!